Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Mobley, and I am a lead educator here at Wonders of Wildlife National Museum and Aquarium. I want to thank you guys for joining us today live as we end the month of June with our last pollinator live stream. If you are here, welcome. Along with our live streams that we do every month, we also offer a free virtual scavenger hunt that you can play right at home through our missions, our Agents of Discovery app. To download the app and explore all of our learning materials, we offer go to www.wondersofwildlife.org/mission-conservation. On this page, click the box to the right that says get the app, hit the download button, and follow the instructions. Once you have that app downloaded, create a user account and log in. Always make sure that you are logged into your account to track your progress and earn awesome rewards. After you are logged into your account, click that search bar and type in mission conservation. This is how you will find all of our at-home missions for you to play. Along with our at-home missions we create, we also include an activity guide that has a craft and a super cool outdoor activity as well. If you look a little bit further down on that mission conservation page, you will see our featured mission section. This displays all of our most current missions, like our pollinator mission with Agent Raccoon. Lastly, I want to bring your attention to the schedule of missions and activities. This section will show you all of our missions that are currently live. Click that plus button to drop down that tab, and you will also see a link to the activity guide that we offer every month. This is where you will also find many of our partners' missions as well. Now, did you know that there are 17,500 known species of butterflies, with 750 of those being right here in the United States? Butterflies and other pollinators like bees play a huge role in our ecosystems and our food production. Pollinators help pollinate 100 US plants, such as fruit trees, melons, and even squash. Today, we have Katie Lynn from Monarch Joint Venture here with us today. Katie Lynn is the education coordinator and is here to talk to us about a very special pollinator, monarch butterflies. The monarch butterfly is known for its beautiful orange wings and their amazing seasonal migration. I will pass it over to Katie Lynn to teach us a little bit more about monarch butterflies. How are you, Katie?
I'm good. Thanks, Sarah, so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here today. Like Sarah said, my name is Katie Lynn. I'm the education coordinator for the Monarch Joint Venture, and I'm here to talk a little bit about monarchs and a little bit about other pollinators that we share our planet with as well. So we'll get started with the presentation. I am the education coordinator for the Monarch Joint Venture, which is a national nonprofit to conserve the monarch butterfly and its migration. And the first half of my slide deck today is from a project called the Pollinator Ambassadors Program, which is something that I was involved with the University of Minnesota Bee Lab, Department of Entomology. So that was funded by the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund with the state of Minnesota. Next slide. So to start, I wanted to start with just sharing that while I work specifically with monarchs, there are hundreds, thousands of other pollinators that we share our ecosystems with. Bees are probably the most well-known as pollinators. They collect the pollen in flowers to feed their young, and they can move a lot more pollen than many other pollinators out there. They're very efficient in their pollen gathering. That's what they do. Flies are another pollinator. Sometimes they might look like bees, but are not always bees, like the one that you can see on that flower there, on the yellow flower. They're often attracted to flowers that smell like rotting meat or dung, and their high numbers can make them pretty important pollinators, despite the fact that they don't have quite as many hairs on their bodies as bees do. Many people's favorite pollinators are butterflies and moths. Monarch butterflies are part of that group, and they can move pollen quite a bit further than other pollinators, although they don't always visit the same types of flowers. Wasps are another type of pollinator. They can also provide some pest control on plants. I know a lot of people don't like wasps, but they are an important pollinator for many species. Next slide. Another lesser known pollinator are beetles, and they were actually some of the first insects to pollinate flowers 140 million years ago. So they've been around for a long time, and they are the most diverse group of insects on the planet and very important pollinators, although not quite as well celebrated as butterflies or bees. Another common pollinator that some people might be aware of are birds, particularly hummingbirds. Now, where I am in Minnesota, bird pollinated flowers are often red and they don't usually have a lot of scent. And that's true for a lot of other places too, but the hummingbirds love them. And another lesser celebrated, but still very fun pollinator are bats. These can be especially important in deserts or tropics where there's lots of fruit and big flowers. Where I am in Minnesota, there are no bats that are pollinators. All the bats that we have here in Minnesota are insectivores. So they eat insects like mosquitoes and other things that maybe we don't want to have flying around, but bats are also an important pollinator. Next slide. There we go. So why are pollinators so important? You heard Sarah mentioned that they pollinate a lot of food, but 80% of plants rely on animals for pollination, which is really important. The other 20% are pollinated by other means. Next slide. But plants that are pollinated by animals are pollinated because the animals are moving the pollen between flowers. So they're visiting one flower, like the flower you see on the left there, collecting pollen as they go down into the bottom of the flower to find nectar or other pollen. That pollen gets all over their bodies, and then they move to the next flower and they move that pollen onto the other parts of the flower on the next plant, which then produces a seed. Seeds are sometimes encased in fruits, or sometimes they're the nuts that we eat, like almonds. This particular fruit looks a little bit like an apple. So apples are also pollinated by pollinators, by insects, as well as many of the other types of fruits that we enjoy eating, like strawberries and blueberries and things like that. Next slide. So I mentioned that 80% of plants rely on animals for pollination, from moving that pollen from one flower to the next so that they can share their genetic material and produce fruit. The other 20% is pollinated by wind or self-pollinated. So it's important to keep in mind those types of things too when you're thinking about planting for pollinators, but most plants are pollinated by insects and other animals. And next slide, there we go. So pollination helps the plants produce fruit, produce offspring, but those plants also feed and house countless other creatures and creatures that eat those creatures. And those plants also help maintain our soil and water health. And our ecosystems are so dependent on a healthy and diverse pollinator population. So it's really important for us to keep that in mind as we're planning things in our backyards even. Now, some pollinators are in decline and some appear to be relatively stable, but unfortunately for most pollinators, we don't know how they're doing. Next slide. We know that bumblebees, about 1 in 3 bumblebee species are in decline. One example is the rusty patch bumblebee, which you can see on this slide. This was once a very common bumblebee across parts of North America, and it's now facing extinction. It is a federally listed species. Honeybees, however, are not in decline. They're also not a native pollinator, but while they do have health problems within their hives, those colony numbers are stable and beekeepers can always raise more bees. Beekeepers take care of honeybees just like they would any other sort of livestock organism. Now, monarch butterflies are also in decline. They've been decreasing over the last 25 years or so, and we are watching it very closely. They are currently not listed as an endangered species, but they are a candidate species for listing, and the plan is to list them under the Endangered Species Act in a couple of years here. So what's causing all of these declines? Now, pollinators are facing more and more challenges, such as fewer flowers, more pesticides. There are more parasites and disease. Global climate change is a really big issue for many pollinators as well. And many of these problems interact in ways that compound the damage done by one. For example, a pollinator might be able to withstand some parasites and pathogens, but if they're getting sprayed with pesticides, or they're dealing with extreme heat or extreme drought or extreme cold, they might not be able to withstand those as well as if they didn't have to worry about all of these other issues. Next slide. So I'll talk about a few more examples of some of these later, but some things that you can do to help pollinators in your own backyard or in your own community is to provide homes, which includes nesting sites for native bees, planting flowers for nectar, reducing or eliminating your use of pesticides, collecting data for a citizen science program, or taking climate action. You can learn more about all of this and which actions you can take also at blab.umn.edu. But I'm going to talk a little bit about monarchs and why we talk about monarchs here at Monarch Joint Venture. Next slide. So MJV, which is the short term for our organization, Monarch Joint Venture, is a national partnership organization working to conserve the monarch butterfly and its migration. We have partners all over the country, from federal agencies down to small other nonprofits like ourselves, and any type of organization in between. Now, each one of these organizations is working to conserve the monarch butterfly in one of 4 different pillars. Next slide. That we focus all of our energy on. Obviously, we're a partnership or organization, so that's a key piece, but also our partners are working in the realms of habitat, education, and science. And we do this for monarchs because they make a great flagship species for conservation. People love monarchs. I'm sure many of you listening, watching either live today or in the future, also have your own monarch stories. So we use them because they're a charismatic organism that is easily recognizable as monarch butterflies. So you might recognize some of the pictures on this life cycle slide. We've got the egg, which hatches into a caterpillar, which then forms into a chrysalis. And then out of that chrysalis comes an adult. Now, one of the challenges, but also one of the interesting things that monarch butterflies face is that they only have one kind of host plant, and that's milkweed. Now, there's over 100 different species of milkweed native to North America, but they can lay their eggs on any one of them. And they usually lay those eggs within the flower clusters at the top of the plant, on the undersides of leaves, or really anywhere along the stem, anywhere that the female can reach her abdomen into. Most likely you'll find them near the top of the plant on the undersides of leaves though. Out of that egg hatches a little itty bitty caterpillar. You know, that egg is only about the size of a pinhead, and they molt about 5 times, not about, exactly 5 times in the larval stage. And you can see all 5 of those larval stages on this slide here. We've got the egg on that smaller leaf up on the top, and out of that egg is a little tiny caterpillar. A few days later, it will molt into a slightly larger caterpillar, and so on and so forth. And that process from the time it hatches to the time it's ready to form its chrysalis takes about 2 weeks at most, with average temperatures. And they, within that frame of time, they can grow 2,000 times their original size. That would be like a human infant, a little tiny newborn baby, growing to the size of an elephant in just 2 weeks, which is a phenomenal amount of growth. And it's a lot of food and a lot of waste, a lot of frass. Next slide. So at the end of the 2 weeks, they will leave the milkweed plant that they've been eating as caterpillars and hang upside down in a J form to form their chrysalis. They'll molt one last time to form their chrysalis here, which you can see on the right. And then they stay in that chrysalis for about another 10 to 14 days. So in total, from the time it takes from the egg to the adult butterflies you see here, it takes about a month on average in the summertime for monarchs to complete their life cycle. You can see the female is on the left, the male is on the right, and you can tell the difference between the two by looking at their hind wings, the 2 wings on the back. And on either side of their abdomen, the male will have 2 little dots that the female does not have. Now, one of the really big challenges, but one of the most spectacular things about monarchs is their migration. Their migration makes them a challenge to conserve and to protect because they move across the entire continent. But they also, that's also what makes them unique and what makes a lot of people want to get behind them to conserve this fantastic migration. So in the fall, starting around mid to late August, monarchs will start the migration south to either Mexico or the coast of California. So where I am in Minnesota, the migration starts around the middle of August, and the monarchs make it to central Mexico sometime around the end of October or beginning of November. For Western monarchs, those monarchs that reside west of the Rocky Mountains, the migration starts around the same time, but they arrive slightly earlier than the 1st of November, and they're overwintering on the coast of California. Next slide. This migratory generation of monarchs can live up to 9 months, which is a very long time for a little tiny insect. The monarchs that we see around in the summer only live for somewhere between 2 to 6 weeks because of that's just how long their bodies last. But this overwintering generation is special. They're not sexually mature yet, so they can't mate, they can't lay eggs, and that allows them to prolong their life for 9 times longer than their breeding counterparts. And they do this because the conditions are just right where they're overwintering. Next slide. Monarchs in the west of the Rocky Mountains spend their winter in groves of eucalyptus, Monterey pine, and cypress along the coast of California. And the clusters that these monarchs are in range from just a few to several hundred or several thousand or even several 100,000. And the conditions there and in Mexico are just right. If they're not too hot, it's not too cold, it's just perfect for them. It keeps their metabolism slow enough so that they don't need to find food all the time, but warm enough that they're not freezing. Next slide. Monarchs in the eastern part of North America, those east of the Rocky Mountains, spend the winter in the Oyamel fir forest west of Mexico City, high up in the mountains. And there are between 5 and 15 colonies that range in size from just a few trees to several acres. And you can see on these photos here, they are in very dense clusters all up and down the trees, hanging from branches, just kind of biding their time, waiting for winter to end and spring to come. Next slide. Now, for the most part, for most of the winter, monarchs move very little. But as the spring approaches and the weather starts getting warmer, the sun stays up higher in the sky for longer, they start to become more active. And when this happens, they'll start leaving their roosts more often to find water and any nectar that might be available. Next slide. So there might not be a lot of nectar available really at all through most of the winter, but as February approaches and maybe even late January, more and more nectar sources become available, and that sort of wakes their bodies up to begin flying north to complete the full annual cycle, the full migration. Next slide. So this migration in the spring begins sometime in late February or March, depending on which population the monarch is part of. But the monarchs that are overwintering on either the coast of California or in central Mexico start to migrate. And then as they find milkweed, they'll start laying their eggs along the way. And then their eggs are the monarchs that will complete the migration back to where their grandparents or great-grandparents were born from. So the monarchs that I'm seeing right now in Minnesota, I have monarchs in my yard here in Minnesota. The monarchs that I'm seeing as caterpillars are the grandchildren of the monarchs that overwintered in Mexico. So we'll see about 2 to 3 generations of breeding monarchs throughout the summer. But that's one of the most spectacular things I think about the migration, is that monarchs in Mexico have never been there before, and they'll never be there again, and yet they're finding the same places year after year. And that gives me hope. So I want to share with you all, take heart, have hope. There are a lot of people working on the conservation of monarchs and the conservation of pollinators. Next slide. And you can see some examples again on this slide of all of our partners that are here with the Monarch Joint Venture. And we have some international partners as well. They're not official partners of MJV, next slide, but they are close colleagues that we work with, including the Insectarium of Montreal, the Environment Climate Change Canada, WWF Mexico, Correo Real, and all of these other organizations that you see listed on this slide. So this is really a tri-national effort. Monarchs across North America need help from people across North America. So we're all working together. Next slide. And you can be assured that someone somewhere is monitoring some part of the monarch life cycle at any given time during the year. Next slide. So what can you do? What can you do at home? The first thing, you're already started. You're already learning more about monarchs. So I encourage you to learn more and go out and explore. See if you can find some milkweed, see if you can find some monarchs, and just become familiar with the sorts of things that live in your own habitat where you live. The next best thing you can do for monarchs is to plant habitat. For monarchs especially, this is the limiting factor for the needing to increase their population. They need more milkweed and they need more nectar plants. Next slide. So planting for pollinators involves making sure that you have a continuous bloom of a diverse array of native plants that can be host plants for pollinators, nesting sites for pollinators, and nectar sources. Next slide. So to provide food and homes for pollinators, you want to make sure that you have bare ground for ground nesting bees, old stems for cavity nesting bees, maybe some leaf piles or piles of grass that are undisturbed that bumblebees can nest in. And then of course you want to make sure that you have host plants for butterflies and moths. And that can be more than just milkweed. It can be a lot of different things. Now, there are over 100 species of milkweed native to North America. So look for what's native for your region in local native plant guides. Some places to start include the Xerces Society. They have some really excellent plant guides. Pollinator Partnership has eco-regional plant guides as well. My personal favorite is National Wildlife Federation's Native Plant Finder. You just go to their website, type in your zip code, and it gives you an entire list of plants. You can also check out local nurseries through MJV's vendor map. Next slide. One thing to avoid are pesticides. They can harm beneficial insects too. And when you're thinking about monarchs, avoid tropical milkweed, as this is a non-native species of milkweed and can perpetuate diseases and winter breeding. Next slide. Sometimes you might see on plants that you purchase from the nursery, these little tags that say it's been treated with neonicotinoids to prevent problematic insects. But the thing to keep in mind is that this type of pesticide can also harm beneficial insects like bees and butterflies. So avoid plants that look like that. The next thing you can do is contribute to a community or citizen science program. I have some examples on the next slide here for some simple ones that you can get started with, including Journey North, which tracks the migration, Monarch Watch, which also tracks the migration. Monarch Watch and the Southwest Monarch Study use tags to track the monarch migration. Project Monarch Health looks at diseases. The Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper, much like Journey North, is trying to get some presence and absence data of where monarchs are and where they are not. And then the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project asks volunteers to go out about once a week to count how many eggs and caterpillars are on milkweed in their area. Next slide. If none of those things are options for you, you can always consider donating to a conservation organization that can then take your dollars and amplify them and make sure they're getting put into the places that need the most work, such as habitat or research. And then finally, one thing that I challenge you to do, I guess, is to connect and share. And this can be with anybody. This can be with your local elected and city officials. This can be with your neighbors, your family, your friends. Share what you know about monarchs and what you're doing to help, and then encourage them to do the same. And really, next slide, monarchs are kind of this connecting piece between many, many people. I know people young and old, all walks of life that can be engaged and have been engaged with monarchs. And that's why we use them as a flagship, because they're just so charismatic. People love them and want to get behind them to help them. So with that, we can work together to protect pollinators, and by working together to protect, we can make a difference in the lives of the pollinators around us and our own lives as well. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer any if you have any questions. You can also visit the Monarch Joint Venture website at monarchjointventure.org. We've got lots of other additional information on there, but I want to thank you all for having me today, and I will turn it back to Sarah.
Thank you so much. As we end our live stream today, I want to thank everyone for joining us live, and also those who might be finding this video a little bit later down the road. I, of course, want to give a special thank you to Katie Lynn for joining us today and giving us some awesome resources and information about pollinators and monarch butterflies. I don't know about you guys, but I am ready to go build my own pollinator garden. If you like today's program and want to give us some support, give us a thumbs up under this video. You can also check out our YouTube page and see all of our past live streams. If you would like to know what we have coming up in the future and keep up with our videos, be sure to subscribe. Our next live stream will be on July 12th with Jurassic Forest in Alberta, Canada. As we end our video today, I want to challenge everyone to be the change, make an impact, and always connect with wildlife. See you guys next time.